Chapter 8. Carl. As Carl neared his homestead, he tried to see it with fresh eyes. It was his home, and he had worked hard to build it, so there was a sense of pride in his chest that could not be taken away. But Elizabeth was a proper woman from the city, and he wondered how she would see it. As the small cabin came into view, he felt her tense beside him. She said nothing. Had said nothing since they left the church, only sat ramrod straight in the seat beside him, but he could feel it in her presence. The cabin was small, but it was large enough for him. There was a main room, a kitchen with a small table where he ate, and his bedroom. There was not much more, but he hadn't had need for much more. "It's very quaint," Elizabeth said, as he pulled the horse to a stop in front of the cabin. "How many rooms?"
"Just the one bedroom, but there's room to build when—"
He trailed off as a red heat climbed his neck. He'd been about to say when children came into the picture, but he realized he had not discussed this with Elizabeth, and he didn't want her to think he expected them right away. From the rosy pink coloring her cheeks, it was obvious she knew what he'd been about to say.
"When it becomes necessary," he finished.
"Ah, yes, I see." She held her bag tightly in her delicate hands, so tightly that the knuckles of her hand were turning white. "Will we be sharing that room tonight, then?" Her words came out scratchy and in a halting manner, as if merely forcing them from her throat and across her lips caused her great discomfort.
"I can sleep on the couch in the main room until—"
He again let the words die out, but this time because he wasn't sure how to finish them. He wanted her to be comfortable with him, but what if that never happened? Never sharing a bed with her wasn't an option, as he wanted a family. But he also didn't want to give her a firm set of days in case it would fluster her too much and cause her to decide that she no longer wanted to engage in this agreement. They were officially married, but he did not know if there were clauses to mail-order bride contracts. Perhaps he should have learned more about them before now. "Ah, yes, that will be agreeable then." He tried not to feel slighted by the intense look of relief that crossed her features.
"Let me get you set up in the bedroom."
She nodded and allowed him to help her down. Then she waited, still clutching her bag like a barrier between them while he led the way into the cabin. The main room was sparse, but furnished with a couch and a chair that he'd made himself. The table in the kitchen was also made by hand, and would suffice until children came into the picture. He opened the door to his bedroom, a simple room with a bed, a dresser for clothes, and a table next to the bed that held his Bible at night and a candle he could light so he could read at night.
"I hope this will be satisfactory."
"Do you have no mirror?" she asked, glancing around the room.
"Haven't felt the need for one, but we can pick one up in town if you'd like."
He'd saved a few dollars in the time he'd waited for her to arrive for this very purpose. He hadn't known what she might like, but wanted to have the means to provide what he could. "I can do without for a time. I have a small one with me." She glanced around again. "I suppose you have no indoor washroom?" The heat climbed his face once again. Jessie had mentioned this to him, that women preferred to have a washroom in the house and not outside, but he hadn't had the time or the means to build one yet.
"I don't currently, but it is something we can look at adding on to the homestead."
The color drained from her face slightly, but she nodded. "That would be lovely. You mentioned housework in your ad. Other than keeping the house in order and cooking, will you be expecting anything else of me?" Carl had hoped she would have some knowledge of a farming life, but from the appearance of her hands, he wondered if she'd use them for any work at all.
"Eventually, I would like to teach you the intricacies of farming so you can help in the field. But for now, perhaps you can feed the animals closer to the house, grab the eggs from the chickens and such."
"I believe I can do that. Do you have a garden as well?" He blinked in surprise at her question.
A small one, but there is space if you would like to grow more.
Thank you. That would be very nice. Silence fell between them, and Carl realized he knew very little of this woman. He wondered if there would be many uncomfortable pauses like this between them, or if they would become companions as Kate and Jessie had. He hoped for the latter and realized he might need to pick Jessie's brain to find out how to encourage the process.
Well, I need to check the fields. I will leave you to rest if necessary. Generally, I eat supper when the sun sets. Do you think you'll be able to work with that parameter, or should I plan on fixing supper tonight?
Elizabeth looked toward the small kitchen. I am sure that I can find something to make. Carl nodded, wishing he knew what else to say to her. This was more awkward than he'd expected. He clearly should have asked Jessie more questions.
That sounds fine. I'll be back at dusk.
It felt odd leaving a stranger in his house. It felt even more odd to know that stranger was now his wife.
Lord, please put your hand on this situation. Bless this marriage and help us to develop the kind of relationship that you would want us to have.
He glanced back at the homestead and wondered how long that might take.